Tonight, we're looking at a story of immense economic disruption. Tariffs, a global retail giant, and honestly, billions of dollars. But first, let's keep it simple. What exactly is a tariff? Think of it as a tax. It's a tax that a government places on goods that are imported from other countries. The goal is often to make foreign products more expensive. This, in theory, encourages people and businesses to buy goods made in their own country instead. These taxes are collected at the border when the products arrive, and the cost is usually passed down the line, from the importer to the retailer, and finally, to you, the consumer. It's a tool governments have used for centuries to protect domestic industries and generate revenue. But why do these taxes matter so much? Well, their impact can be enormous, creating ripple effects across the entire economy. For a massive company like Amazon, which sources millions of different products from all over the globe, tariffs can fundamentally change the cost of doing business. Suddenly, a product that was profitable to sell becomes a money loser. This forces companies to make difficult choices. During his presidency, Donald Trump made trade a central pillar of his America First agenda. He argued the United States had been taken advantage of by other countries for decades, particularly by China. His administration's solution was to use tariffs as a primary tool to try and level the playing field. The stated goals were clear: to pressure China into fairer trade practices, to bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States, and to reduce the nation's trade deficit. Starting in 2018, the administration began imposing sweeping tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods, ranging from raw materials like steel and aluminum to a vast array of consumer electronics, machinery, and household products. These were not small surgical adjustments. They were significant, often escalating in waves, creating a climate of uncertainty and unpredictability for any business that relied on international trade. The tariffs started at 10% on some goods, and later climbed to 25% on a wider range of products. For companies that had built their entire business models on sourcing low-cost goods from China, this was a seismic event. The administration's belief was that this economic pressure would force a change in behavior from Beijing and simultaneously incentivize American companies to move their production back onto United States soil. The strategy was confrontational and designed to deliver a shock to the system. Faced with billions of dollars in potential new costs from the tariffs, Amazon did not simply absorb the financial hit. A corporation of its scale and sophistication operates on razor-thin margins for many of its retail goods. A sudden 25% increase in costs was simply unsustainable. The company's response was not emotional, it was a cold, hard business calculation. Amazon's primary responsibility, in the eyes of its leadership and shareholders, is to deliver products to consumers as cheaply and efficiently as possible. The tariffs directly threatened this core mission, so the company began to execute a massive, strategic pivot in its supply chain operations. The decision-making process inside Amazon was driven by data. The company analyzed which product categories were most affected and which parts of its supply chain were most vulnerable. The conclusion was stark. The heavy reliance on Chinese manufacturing was now a significant liability. Instead of waiting to see if the trade war would end, or passing the full cost on to consumers and risking a massive drop in demand, Amazon chose a third option. It initiated a plan to systematically shift a significant portion of its sourcing and logistics out of China. This wasn't about making a political statement, it was about preserving its business model of low prices and fast delivery. This strategic departure was a monumental undertaking. For years, Amazon had perfected a system that leaned heavily on the unparalleled manufacturing ecosystem of China. It provided cheap labor. It provided a dense network of component suppliers. It provided skilled workers. It provided efficient ports. Leaving meant untangling this complex web and attempting to recreate it elsewhere. The company began aggressively exploring and investing in manufacturing capacity in other countries, primarily in Southeast Asia. The process of disentangling a supply chain so deeply embedded in China was never going to be cheap or clean. The estimated $13 billion figure represents the staggering cost of this transition for Amazon. This wasn't a single loss, but an accumulation of expenses and disruptions over several years. First, direct costs. Scouting for new partners, setting up new manufacturing partnerships Vietnam, India. Sending teams to vet factories, negotiating new contracts, investing in logistics to meet Amazon's quality and volume standards. It was like rebuilding a foundational part of the company from the ground up, and it was incredibly expensive. Then came the indirect but equally damaging costs of disruption. As Amazon shifted its orders, the finely tuned system moving products from Chinese factory floors to American doorsteps began to break down. There were massive delays. New Southeast Asian factories couldn't match the same speed or scale as Chinese counterparts. That led to product shortages for some best-selling items. For a company that prides itself on having everything in stock, beyond the billions of dollars in corporate strategy, this supply chain shift had a profound impact on real people. Let's start with the small and medium-sized American businesses that rely on Amazon's platform. Many of these third-party sellers built their entire livelihoods on sourcing affordable products from China and selling them in the US market through Amazon. When the tariffs hit, their cost of goods shot up overnight. Suddenly, a small family business selling, for example, custom-designed phone accessories found their profit margins completely erased by the 25% import tax. They were caught in an impossible position: either raise their prices and lose customers to competitors, or eat the cost and go out of business. The stories from this period are telling. We heard from entrepreneurs who had invested their life savings into an inventory of products that was now stuck in Chinese ports, too expensive to import. Some desperately tried to find new manufacturers in other countries, a difficult and time-consuming process for a small operation without Amazon's resources. Others simply could not compete anymore. For them, the tariffs were not an abstract policy, but a direct blow to their American dream. Their businesses, which often employed a handful of local workers for packaging and shipping, began to shrink or in some cases fold completely, unable to withstand the financial pressure. The impact was also felt by American workers in the logistics and transportation sectors. While Amazon as a whole continued to grow, the disruption caused significant volatility. To truly grasp the scale of this disruption, we need to look at the numbers. The headline figure: an estimated $13 billion in costs and losses absorbed by Amazon. Internal analysis and supply chain experts broke that cost into key areas. Approximately $3 billion was attributed to direct tariff payments in the early stages before the supply chain could be fully rerouted. Another $5 billion was spent on the logistical nightmare of establishing new supply lines, setting up contracts, air freighting goods to avoid stockouts, reconfiguring shipping routes. The remaining $5 billion accounts for lost sales due to product unavailability and the cost of liquidating stranded inventory. Consider the impact on the third-party sellers on its platform, who account for over half of all units sold. A survey by the National Retail Federation in 2020 found that 85% of small businesses selling online reported costs had increased directly due to the tariffs on Chinese goods. Of those, nearly 60% reported having to delay hiring new employees or lay off existing staff because of the financial strain. This data shows that the pain was not confined to corporate headquarters in Seattle, but was distributed across thousands of small enterprises throughout the country. U.S. Census Bureau data shows that between 2018 and 2022, imports from China in key consumer electronics and furniture categories fell by over 20%. During that same period, U.S. imports of those goods from Vietnam skyrocketed by over 150%, and from Thailand by nearly 80%. This is a statistical fingerprint of the supply chain exodus in action. This shift represents one of the fastest and most significant realignments of global trade in modern history. The $13 billion meltdown at Amazon was part of a much larger economic story where, ultimately, the final bill was passed on.